This is the Good Government Show.
I felt good about being Inspector General. I felt good about really trying to improve government operations, and that really is the focus of being an Inspector General. Essentially, $18 returned for every dollar invested in the Inspector General community. I really cut my teeth at the Department of Justice. That was the first 10 years of my experience in the government. One of the great benefits that the IGs provide, and oversight as a whole, is a deterrent effect. It's interesting, the Inspectors General, it's been characterized as sort of the most important public servant you've never heard of. Government workers work hard and they really try to do the right thing.
The most important government job you've never heard of. That describes the office of Inspector General. That's how the former Inspector General for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, described his job. Welcome to the Good Government Show. I'm Dave Martin. First, help us share the message of good government by liking us and sharing us where we are on Facebook, X, YouTube, Instagram, and Blue Sky. Please share our show with your friends and review us right here where you're listening and join our Good Government Show community. Check out our website for the link. On today's episode, I talk with Jay Lerner. He's had a career in public service, the last 12 years working as an Inspector General. There are 72 Inspectors General working in the federal government. The mission of the office is to find and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. They were created to be an independent body that provides government oversight. Unfortunately, the current presidential administration has tried to limit their role, firing inspectors generals and attempting to reduce their influence. As you'll hear, their role is critical, important, and a necessary check, which is exactly what we need in a healthy democracy. There's a lot of good government coming up in this conversation, a lot. We talk about the FDIC and its role in government, and we discuss a lot of projects that grew out of investigations Jay Lerner did to make sure government ran smoothly and that all of us benefited. Coming up, my conversation with Jay Lerner, former FDIC Inspector General and a long record of public service. We have a new partner here on the Good Government Show, HelloNation. This is a new digital magazine that showcases the best of cities across the nation. We'd all prefer if good news traveled faster. At HelloNation, positive stories don't just get told, they get amplified. HelloNation helps businesses, leaders, and communities share positive stories that matter, building trust, credibility, and meaningful connection. Through professionally produced podcasts, digital features, and targeted distribution, HelloNation positions you as the answer regular folks are looking for, while expanding and scaling your digital footprint across the platforms that people trust. Good news deserves momentum. Your city or your business can help spread the word of good news across the nation. At HelloNation, they don't just have advertisers, they have advertisers. Editorial content from trusted community leaders and cities that are helping spread the good news. Let HelloNation lift you up and lead the conversation. Visit HelloNation.com to learn more. Once you wrap up this episode of the Good Government Show, give a listen to our friends over at Good News for Lefties. This daily podcast highlights news stories that show there's more good news out there. Other people in government are really trying to do the right thing. That's Good News for Lefties. Listen where you're listening now. Welcome to the Good Government Show. I'm very happy to have with me Jay Lerner, who is a National Academy of Public Administration Fellow. He was also with the Department of Justice. He was an Inspector General for the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, several years at Justice. Welcome to the show. There's a lot I want to get to. There's a lot I want to talk about. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Now, I don't know where to begin, so I'm going to just jump right in. First of all, we met at the National Academy of Public Administration at their annual conference where you're a fellow. Just let's start there. National Academy of Public Administration, we've talked to a few folks. What's your role there? What do you do? And why should we all pay attention to what the NAPA folks are doing?
Yeah, NAPA does some really important work. I became a fellow just 2 years ago, so I'm relatively new as a fellow, but they really are the experts in public administration, a congressionally authorized organization, and they can help with administration of governments at federal level, state level, local level, on various issues. They can do some strategic planning and work on particular subject matter areas and topics. One area that they're really focused on is artificial intelligence and how that will affect, future government administration, public administration. And NAPA has about 1,000 fellows. So there's a wide range of expertise and experience among those fellows at various levels of government. And, it's a pool of candidates that they can draw upon for that expertise in various areas.
All to create and improve and make good government better, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's really the goal. And these people have, many years of experience in the government, have devoted their careers to it, of public service. And so that is what drives them. That's what motivates them and inspires them as well.
Well, here on the Good Government Show, we like to know that people are working towards good government. So that's good news. I wanted to talk to you about your most recent role. 31 years in federal government. I know I kind of glossed over your entire resume, but let's just start with your last job. You were Inspector General for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. Let's start with what is the FDIC, and this was something that was created after the Great Depression in the 1930s, correct?
Yeah, that's right. The FDIC is the insurance corporation. They insure our bank deposits up to $250,000, all the bank deposits around the country. And it's really a way to establish some security or stability in the financial system so that the banks there's not a run on banks, which is what happened in the Great Depression and what led to the creation of the FDIC. They also do safety and soundness examinations of banks to make sure that the banks are safe and sound, as well as managing when a bank does fail, managing the resolution and the receivership of that bank in those events where a bank fails.
Without the FDIC, where would we be? I mean, I remember, it's a wonderful life. People ran on the bank and they didn't have any money. Without that, I mean, would that be what we would go back to?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what would happen in the absence, but it wasn't that long ago. We had the Great Recession in 2008, 2011 timeframe, and there was a lot of concern about runs on banks. I think it was roughly over 400 banks that failed during that time. And there was great concern of people having their money in a bank and whether it would be insured or safe. And FDIC provides that insurance and helped in those situations where banks failed during the Great Recession. That was just 15 years ago or so.
This again strikes me as good government. Government stepping in to make sure that when you put your $10,000 rainy day savings account in a bank, it stays there.
That's right. Yeah. And that's something that provides stability and integrity to the financial system as a whole.
So what I really want to talk to you about, though, is your 13 years, 12 years as an Inspector General. Let's start at the very beginning. What is the role of Inspector General in the government? Sure.
And just to clarify, it was 12 years in the IG community, the Inspector General community, 6 years at the Department of Justice Inspector General's office, which is where I was Chief of Staff, and then 6 years as the Inspector General at the FDIC. The Inspector General Act of 1978 was created post-Watergate, after the Watergate era. And there were a number of government reforms that took place in that time frame after, the Watergate break-in in 1972 and President Nixon resigned in 1974, a number of reforms to make sure that executive powers were limited and focused. And one of them was the Inspector General Act. And it created basically one way to think about it as an internal watchdog within an agency. And so it allowed an independent review of agency programs and operations and investigations where there were, allegations of individuals that were, committing some sort of misconduct or mismanagement. And it brought it to under one roof within an agency. There were 12 inspectors general created in that time frame, and over the past 47 years, it's increased to 72 IGs within the inspector general community in the federal government. It went through great expansion after, in the 1980s, that time frame. It's interesting to know just historically that there was great resistance to the IG Act back in 1978. President Carter resisted it, but
Really?
ultimately signed the act. The Department of Justice resisted
I got to ask,
it.
why was Carter resisting?
Well, I think he was concerned, based on some of the concerns of the Department of Justice, that there was a separation of powers issue.
Okay.
And by that, I mean the inspectors general report both to Congress and to the head of the agency. And so being lodged within the executive branch, they had a reporting requirement to Congress, which crossed over between executive branch and legislative branch. So that was the Department of Justice concern, and I think President Carter had shared similar concerns. Ultimately, he came around and thought it was one of the signature moments of his administration. Interestingly, the GAO, the Comptroller General at the time, also resisted it and thought it was everyone's responsibility to maintain an efficient government and fight fraud, waste, and abuse. And the IG wasn't needed. Once again, ultimately, people came around and, in the 1980s, I think a lot of the agencies and the administration, the Reagan administration at that time, really appreciated IGs and expanded the role to where it is, over time today.
Is it working?
I think so. I think 2025 has been a tough year for inspectors general. We can talk about that.
Sure,
but I think over time it has been working. That being said, I think there are improvements that could be made to the IG role. But it has been very effective in fighting waste, fraud, and abuse over that time.
How challenging is it to have an office that's investigating the department that you're working in?
It is challenging, and IGs often say that they're not the most popular people in the agency. There was always a joke, no one would want to sit with us at the cafeteria, or we'd get on the elevator and people would walk off.
Or talk quietly, or stop talking.
But it was really created to be an independent function and an independent watchdog, essentially, within the agency. And so that independence is really important to the role, and being able to sort of call it like you see it and call balls and strikes as an inspector general. And so we do that without fear or favor and follow the facts wherever they might lead. It's not always a popular position, but it is an important position to conduct that oversight in an independent manner.
And for the most part, is it inside the department that you're working at? Is it respected? Is it something that everyone says, well, that's their role, that's their job, we got to help them out, or are you like a lone wolf in the department?
I think it's a little bit of a mix. It depends on the department. It depends on the relationship. It depends on the IG. I always tried to maintain good relations with the agency and make sure that there was transparency, that they knew what we were working on, and that there was clarity in terms of our role, what we were investigating, what we were auditing, and our findings, making recommendations and having a discussions. It's important to have those discussions when you're thinking about making a recommendation for improvements to the agency and working through whether it's feasible, whether it makes sense, whether it's prudent. And those are some of the conversations that you have with the agency. And I think that builds the credibility and trust between the inspector general and an independent function and the agency itself.
You did it for a long time. It's a hard job. Why did you stick with it for so long?
I felt good about being inspector general. I felt good about really trying to improve government operations. And that really is the focus of being an inspector general, is working to make those improvements. And like I said, it's not always popular, but it's an important role. The audit evaluation function that I mentioned looks at programs and their efficiencies and whether they're meeting their goals, whether those are even the right goals that you should be aiming for. And the investigations is another aspect that I think is really an important function, and it draws upon my experience as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice in prior years to investigate financial frauds. And that, I think, also maintains the integrity and credibility in the financial system to make sure that people aren't embezzling money or doing money laundering or committing bank fraud. Those were the kinds of cases we handled at the FDIC.
Talking about cases, I found a case, and this is an old case, and I don't expect you to know all the details of a case, but I just found one, and it just jumped out at me. It was a private healthcare company. It was called Outcome Health. They were charged with $1 billion in fraud, money laundering, wire fraud, mail fraud, ripping off both customers and, I gather, insurance companies. I have a quote here that says the defendants were charged in allegedly overinflating the company's revenue, so say you, back at this case, back when you were Inspector General of the FDIC. What does a kind of case like this mean to people? And, is this the kind of cases you were doing regularly?
It is the kind of case that we were doing regularly. We often looked at bank fraud cases. And it really goes back to what I was saying before about maintaining the integrity of the financial system. If you have a financial system that people don't have faith in, or that people are committing fraud in, or, like I said, money laundering or embezzling money, no one's going to want to invest in a bank, or there's going to be real doubt as to whether they invest in the bank. So I think our role was very important to make sure that there was an enforcement investigative function to investigate those matters and bring those to prosecution. And so that was the kind of cases we brought. And I think, it was an important role and part of our mission as an Inspector General. I should add that the FDIC Inspector General is unique, or maybe not unique, but it has a certain business model of looking at external cases, meaning outside of the agency.
Okay.
Many inspectors general have internal functions looking at the internal employees of the agency when there's allegations of wrongdoing. So my experience at the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General was more focused on the 120,000 or so employees at the Department of Justice, say like an FBI agent or a DEA agent or U.S. Marshals, and those allegations of wrongdoing by those individuals, whereas the FDIC looked more at external cases of bank fraud at the banks, the regulated industry, and wrongdoing by bankers or at banks.
When you look at the inspectors general across the U.S. government, I saw something that said in 2024, the inspectors general's cases, investigations saved the American people $71 billion.
Yeah. And
$71 billion.
And it's a really great return on investment. The return on investment varies from year to year, but that was essentially $18 returned for every dollar invested in the inspector general community. And so it's a really valuable benefit just in terms of the dollar amounts. But it's also important to think of non-quantifiable benefits that the inspectors general provide as well, even beyond the dollars, because there's a lot of benefits from looking at those programs for efficiencies and so on in terms of things like national security or privacy or healthcare or environmental factors. And there's inspectors general at all the different agencies to improve those programs as well that we really can't put into dollar amounts. And so the IGs can really have a significant impact on improving government functions and maintaining the integrity within the agency, even beyond the numbers themselves. And that $71 billion is a pretty significant amount for 2024. And like I said, it varies from year to year a little bit.
So the current administration right now has decided that it was going to fire 19 inspectors generals. They've shut down websites. They've replaced other inspectors generals with temporary inspectors generals. What's the wisdom here?
Well, I think, I'm not sure I'm in a position to necessarily explain, but I think
does this make any sense to you that you have an organization here that's sole purpose is to, in fact, find waste, fraud, and abuse and to shut that down and to get rid of the people who have the institutional knowledge to discover waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, it's not the way I would operate. That's for sure. I think there's been significant diminished oversight within the executive branch in the past year or so. The IGs provide those benefits that we just talked about, And removing them and that institutional knowledge that you said really, creates a gap. I don't believe they've been replaced. I think there's only been 2 IGs confirmed this year. And in addition to firing several IGs that you mentioned, there were several acting IGs that were replaced, particularly after they issued a critical negative report. And, that oversight really creates a gap, or, the lack of oversight the absence will create a gap, and there, will be inefficiencies that will not be detected, or there might be inaccurate information out there, or, some of these investigations won't be done. So there'll be an increase in fraud or improper payments from the government. There might be unfair competition. A lot of IGs look at the contracting or grant process at agencies, and there might be unfair competition, or there might be ethics issues. One of the great benefits that the IGs provide, and oversight as a whole, is a deterrent effect. I can't tell you how many times I heard that, an agency official said, I would like to do something, but I don't want the IG looking at it, or I don't want that appearing on the front page of a newspaper or in the media.
Yeah.
And so oversight really provides an important deterrent, and it's hard to quantify. There's no way to quantify or prove the negative, but I believe that things are not happening, bad things are not happening because there is an oversight function and the IGs exist.
Would they ever bring you into the office and say, here's what we're thinking about doing? Is this going to fly? I mean, did those conversations ever happen?
Occasionally there was an effort to do that, but IGs are very careful not to be involved in the underlying management of the agency. And it's a way to maintain their own independence in case they would want to audit or evaluate that program down the road. And so in the IG Act, in the statute itself, it's, basically says that IGs should not participate in management decisions. And I was always very careful not to do that. If there was prior work that we had done, prior audits or evaluations that we thought could be useful for future programs, we would share that information with the agency for them to decide. But we were not in the decision-making process at all.
Fair enough. Probably a good idea. Obviously, yeah. I'm not in government or inspector general. So.
Well, it's just a way to maintain that independence, and really, it's a crucial element to the inspector general and oversight as a whole.
You see a headline or you hear something on a news channel that says the president has fired 19 inspectors general. Most people have never had contact with an inspector general. They don't really know what an inspector general does. When you see that headline, what would you like people to understand about what that means?
Well, it's interesting. The Inspector General, it's been characterized as sort of the most important public servant you've never heard of. And
I like that. Say that again. The most
important public servant that you've never heard of. I can't take credit for it. It's a colleague of mine that came up with that, but I think it's also true that it's a really important role that people don't know much about. I feel like I'm still explaining it to my family, even though I was 12 years in the IG community. But that being said, it's, that internal watchdog and the benefits it provides is an important role to make sure that governments are operating, efficiently and, detecting waste, fraud, and abuse when it occurs. And so removing those IGs removes that element and takes away those benefits. So it's really concerning over the past year of the diminished oversight as a whole. One thing that I've been doing since I've retired a couple of years ago is teaching. And I teach a course at George Washington University on oversight and accountability. And I think it's important to think of inspectors general fitting into the larger scheme of oversight of the executive branch. There are at least the first 3 articles of the Constitution create the branches of government, and each branch, legislative, executive, and judiciary, have a role of oversight of the executive branch. And that was the brilliance of the Constitution and the framers to create that system of checks and balances among the different branches of government. And so if you think about it, Congress has a role in terms of their standing committees. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, has an important role, and there's other legislative oversight bodies like the Congressional Research Service or Congressional Budget Office, all that have an important legislative role of oversight over the executive branch. Within the executive branch, the IGs play a very important role, and we've talked about that. as well as there's other functions within the executive branch, like the Office of Government Ethics that looks at the ethics program, the Office of Special Counsel that protects whistleblowers within the executive branch. Even the Department of Justice, its litigating divisions determine the proper legal parameters for the powers of the executive branch. And then ultimately the courts will decide those powers within the executive branch. And so all three of those branches of government have an important oversight role. And I try to think of my, in teaching my course, I try to think of it broadly and how IGs fit into that. And I'll add one more element of oversight, which is the fourth estate, the press and the media, with its role in investigative journalism, and include think tanks in that, or non-governmental organizations that also play an important role of oversight over the executive branch. And so all of that is a system that we've created over time to make sure there's a proper oversight, and that has been largely diminished in this past year, and it's a little bit concerning, the absence of those oversight functions.
Well, I don't know if we're an oversight, but we're trying to explain to folks here on the Good Government Show what it is government does. So hopefully they listen to an episode like this and they're a little bit wiser about what it is that government does. That's our goal. Anyway.
It all starts with awareness, raising awareness. And I think that's an important thing that you're doing, and is something that I think is important for inspectors general to do. You
had 31 years in government service, the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of the Inspector General, the FDIC. You were actually helped start the Homeland Security and the Transportation Security Administration. Why'd you stay in government all this time? You could have cashed out and gone somewhere else, and I'm sure done very well. What kept you in government all that time?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think back to the early part of my career after I got out of law school, I went to a law firm. And then started in the government back in 1992. And I really thought I'd be there just 2 or 3 years and go back to a law firm. But what I realized then and over time, that what was really driving me is the mission of government and serving people, serving the country and serving the American people. And so over time, I realized that was what was motivating me, and that's what I wanted to stick with. And admittedly, it's not necessarily a lucrative process or as lucrative as a law firm. And I'm not going to be a rich man. I understand that. But I also felt like I was doing something that was helping others. And to me, that was particularly motivating. And I was fortunate over that time to have a lot of good opportunities, as you said, at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, in the Inspector General community. And I'm grateful for those opportunities and to be able to serve that mission.
All right. That was the easy part. Are you ready for the hard part?
I hope so. I think so.
The Good Government Show is sponsored by Our. That's OUR for Our Community. Get involved. We hear that all the time from government leaders. Our co-brands with your government's name and logo. Your staff and the people you serve are connected and part of your community. From any device, your members provide reliable data and meaningful feedback. Ask a question like, do we want more parkland or better homeless services? More engaged conversations come through the Our app. Visit Ourco, that's OURCO.com, and book a demonstration. After you get done with this episode, hear more good government stories with our friends at How to Really Run a City. Former mayors Kasim Reed of Atlanta and Michael Nutter of Philadelphia, and their co-host, journalist and author Larry Platt, talk with guests and other mayors about how to really get stuff done in cities around the nation. Check them out where you're listening now or through their nonprofit news site, thephiladelphiacitizen.org/podcasts. Now we're going to get into your real thoughts on what government is all about, your real thoughts, your philosophy of government. 31 years in government service. Define good government. What is it?
Well, I think it starts with service to others, public service, and that really is at the core and what was driving me to serve the American people, and to do it with integrity and prudence, doing it in a smart way, doing the right thing. At its core, I think it's important to have a certain fidelity to the facts, to the underlying facts. We can debate and disagree over policy and the merits of certain policies. And frankly, that's what democracy is about, and having those discussions and debates. But the underlying facts is something the inspectors general really delve deeply into and can really serve. I think it's also important. Good governance is to be transparent. So American people have the right to know how their government agencies operate, and to do it with strong leadership, having a vision of where you want to go for the future. And so those were some of the pillars, the principles that I tried to live up to throughout my career, and particularly as Inspector General at the FDIC.
If people are frustrated with what they're seeing in government at the federal level or even at the local level, what should they do?
I think using their voice. And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. Certainly, you can do it at the ballot box. I think it's also important to communicate that to your representatives, whether it be local representatives, state representatives, Congress, and the like, and to make sure that you voice your opinion. And like I said, the facts are the facts. You can debate over the policy, and that's where I feel like people can really influence the future of government when they express their voice in terms of policy decisions for, oversight. If there's support for oversight, then that should be communicated to your representatives so that they represent the people and provide protections for proper oversight.
You said you were working at a private law firm and decided to go into the government. What made you make the leap into public service and into government, and why'd you do it?
Well, at the time, I wanted to litigate. I wanted to be in court. That was kind of what was driving it, to get some experience of courtroom activity and understanding of the criminal justice process. But like I said, over time, I thought I'd be there a couple of years getting.
Were you an assistant U.S. attorney? Was that your job?
It was in the main justice, which had a different title, but I was prosecuting cases out of the money laundering section at the Department of Justice here in Washington.
Okay. Who inspires you?
I've worked with some really amazing colleagues over the years. I'm not sure I can name any. I don't want to pick any one out.
Okay.
But I've worked with some amazing colleagues over the years. And I really cut my teeth at the Department of Justice. That was the first 10 years of my experience in the government. And in the criminal division, I worked with several, deputy assistant attorneys general that really influenced me, some other great prosecutors. And I've been fortunate to learn from all of those experiences over time.
Did you always see yourself, or did you ever see yourself in public service? Were you president if you're a student government? Were you wanted to be a prosecutor your whole life?
No, my career sort of has taken twists and turns based on what I thought was right at the time and what opportunities were available to me at the time. I did not see myself being a criminal prosecutor, but that's where I ended up and where I landed. And I did not see myself being an inspector general. But like I said, careers have different twists and turns, and I was fortunate to have those opportunities over time.
So you weren't president of your student council?
No, but I was in student government in my law school, actually.
Okay. All right. So, you've been 31 years in government. What would you like people to know about government that they don't know?
I think what is probably most significant is how hard people work in the government. I think there's often a view that, government workers may be lazy or not unmotivated and so on. And there are probably some of them. But frankly, when I started at the Department of Justice and over time, it was really people were rolling up their sleeves to get the job done, and whatever it took, even if it was long hours or weekends or working on holidays and so on. And I think that's an important thing for people to appreciate, that government workers work hard and they really try to do the right thing. Sometimes it seems overly bureaucratic or, process oriented, and there is some of that. But on the whole, in the main, people work really hard, really try to do a good job, and I think they do a good job over time. That isn't to say it can't be improved, but it's really that public interest serving the American people that drives people to stay in the government and to work hard.
What was the best thing about being an inspector general?
I think it was that mission of actually working to make the government operate better, whether it's your particular agency or within the Inspector General community. That was always what was driving me and what I think was driving my colleagues to make improvements in government operations and to maintain that integrity. So when there was an investigation, that we would, delve deeply and investigate a matter and try to do the right thing. So that is what I found, what I took pride in, what I found motivated me, what inspired me, and what, why I stuck with it.
You retired from federal government. You retired? It was your decision to leave?
Yes.
Do you miss it?
I miss certain aspects of it.
Certain aspects. Okay, fair.
So I miss the people. I really, made a lot of good friends over the time and admired learning from others in the Inspector General community or when I was a prosecutor at DOJ. And I miss the people. I also miss some of the mission. But frankly, I really enjoyed retirement and moving in a different direction. I've been doing teaching. We talked about NAPA, the National Academy of Public Administration. I am an expert consultant at the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, in terms of their Center for Audit Excellence. And frankly, I've been doing a lot of volunteer work and once again, feel like I'm serving people, helping others along the way. So I find all of that pretty rewarding as well.
So what do you do for fun?
I've been doing a lot of different things. I've actually started ushering at various either events, concerts, comedy shows,
really?
Theater, musicals. Yeah, and I've really had a good time with it. It's been fun.
You're ushering.
We also have we're also beekeepers, so we keep bees in our backyard. We have a couple back there and produce a lot of honey. So those are some interesting little hobbies we have on our side.
That sounds like that. How many bees do you have?
Well, right now we have 4 hives.
Okay.
You usually start a season in March or April with 2 hives, and sometimes you can split hives so that you end up with more. When they get overcrowded, you can split, and they will make a new queen, and there's 2 hives from one. So we now have 4, and I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, that they will survive through the winter. Basically, we don't touch them between November and, say, March until it gets warm again. So we kind of hope that things go well.
So my mom was an usher at her local community theater. Where are you ushering? I hope not Kennedy Center, I'm guessing.
No, I'm ushering at the Shakespeare Theater Company in Washington and at Arena Stage. Those are the 2 main things. And then I've been working some shows, some concerts at various venues around DC.
All right. So you're seeing some good shows.
I am.
All right, good. What do you think was the most impactful thing that you did as Inspector General?
I think it was the reports, the audit and evaluation reports and the investigations. It's really the 2 sides of Inspector General's office, and I'm proud of all of them, both sides. I think having an impact was really my goal. Some IGs may approach it a little bit differently, but I really took time and energy on important reports. For instance, we did a report on enterprise risk management, how the FDIC managed the risk at the agency as a whole. And based on our report, they created a whole new office and a whole new function at the FDIC. And when the FDIC goes out to examine a bank, they require the banks to look at their risks, but the FDIC was not doing it. So I felt that was an important impact that we had. We did a report on crisis readiness to make sure that the agency was ready in an event of a crisis, whether it be a financial crisis or some other crisis. And once again, they created a whole new office based on our report and hired people to make sure that they could manage crises. So when you see the recommendations and the results from that, you feel good about what you're doing. And on the investigation side, it's what I said before, where I felt we were bringing integrity and stability to the financial system to make sure that there was credibility and that people were willing to place their money in banks and, that it was operating with integrity.
So my last question you've already answered, unfortunately. The question I always ask is, this is the Good Government Show. We always bring it back to good government. Can you give me an example of a good government project you were involved with? You just gave me 2. What's your most favorite from all your 31 years in the government?
I'm not sure I have a favorite, but I being an inspector general, I think was key. And I mentioned some of the reports we did. Yeah. I've worked on several areas responding to crises. And I think that's an area where I felt like I really contributed or made positive contributions, and fortunate to have those opportunities. So, post 9/11, I started up Department of Homeland Security and the transportation, not solely, but I was part of that startup, I should say. But Transportation Security Administration, and it's not a perfect agency, but it brought stability and fought a lot of fear that was going on post 9/11. I worked on some amendments to the Stafford Act after Katrina, after the hurricane in 2005. I think I worked on the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission after the Great Recession in 2010. So, there were a number of things. And frankly, I worked on some legislation that came out of that as well. So those are some of the achievements I feel good about.
That's a lot of good government, it sounds like.
And like I said, that was what was motivating me. And I felt like it was not only good government, as you said, but also really serving the American people and trying to, make improvements. It's not always perfect, but it's a work in progress, and we're always trying to improve things. And I was fortunate to have opportunities to make those positive contributions.
And I should mention before we go, you've actually contributed to a book coming out called Inspectors General: Accountability and Action. Basically, I think you said there were 2 chapters you were involved with. What's your message?
Yeah, the message, one chapter is in the practitioners volume, which really looks at the history of the Inspector General community back from the 1978 or even before the act was passed up to present day. But seeing the development and the evolution of the IG community was that chapter. And the other chapter I co-wrote with Kathy Newcomer at George Washington University. It's part of the academic.
And also a Napa Fellow?
Also a Napa Fellow, exactly. Yeah. And I co-wrote that chapter. It's part of the academic volume on the strategic environment in which IGs operate. It's a very complex environment. And one thing that surprised me when I was Inspector General was just the many constituencies that an IG faces or has to deal with. It is, dual-hatted, so an IG reports both to Congress and to the head of the agency. But there are many other constituencies and stakeholders that IGs need to be aware of. And, that chapter looked at the strategic environment in which IGs operate.
Well, I would love to take a look at that book when it comes out and see if I can get through it, or maybe even, what would be better? I'd like to sit in the back of your classroom for a class or two and see what I can pick up.
You're always welcome. You're always welcome.
All right. There we go. I could take a law school class, something I've always thought about. All right. Jay Lerner, it was a pleasure having you on. So much information, so much good stuff, and just thanks for shining a light on what inspector generals do and the important work they do and the good government that they provide. So thank you for your work, and thanks for coming on the Good Government Show.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for this program. I think it's really important to highlight the work that good government does. So I appreciate that.
We do too. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Want to hear more about good government? Check out another show I host, Leading Iowa, Good Government in Iowa Cities. I host the show with Brad Kavanaugh, Mayor of Dubuque, Iowa, and the immediate past president of the Iowa League of Cities. Together, we talk to leaders in Iowa cities. We talk about what works and what good government looks like in Iowa. Join us right here where you're listening now. That's Leading Iowa, Good Government in Iowa Cities. I told you there was a lot of good government there. Good government, it starts with serving others. It's doing the right thing. That's an excellent definition of good government. Listening to people who've spent a career in public service, you can't help but be inspired by these people. They really dedicate themselves to making America better. That was Jay Lerner's mission, whether he was working as an inspector general, helping to create the Department of Homeland Security, or working as a prosecuting attorney. I was inspired. I hope you were too. That's our show. Thanks for listening. Please like us and share us with your friends and review us right here where you're listening. And check out our website, goodgovernmentshow.com, for extras. Help us keep telling stories of good government in action everywhere. Join us again for another episode right here. I'm Dave Martin, and this is The Good Government Show. The Good Government Show is a Valley Park production. Jim Ludlow, Dave Martin, that's me, and David Snyder are the executive producers. Our show is edited and produced by Jason Stershic. Please subscribe, then share us, and like us and review us. That's the best way to make sure we're able to keep telling these stories of our government working for all of us. Then listen to the next episode of The Good Government Show.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,